It is 4 in the afternoon, and your chest feels like a heavy lead coffin is pressing against your ribs, specifically in the center of your chest, as you stand in this cold chapel. You have carried this suffocating hollowness for 700 days, convinced the waves took everything you loved. You tried setting the extra dinner plate. You tried staring at the lighthouse until your eyes burned, and you tried burying yourself in work. This crushing pressure isn't just grief. It is your body finally warning you that the foundation of your life is rotting from within. In moments, you will understand why my dead wife is currently smiling at my brother at that altar. My name is Arthur Sterling, and at 54, I've spent 30 years as a senior structural engineer building bridges designed to survive a century. I understand foundations, load-bearing walls, and the slow rot of neglected steel. But I never saw the cracks in my own home. For 730 days, I have lived in the shadow of a coastal storm that stole my wife, Elena, without leaving a body to bury. I can still smell her vanilla perfume in the hallways and see the way she tucked a silk blue ribbon into her hair. This void of the unrecovered remains has turned my existence into a hollow shell of perpetual, agonizing waiting. My life was built around my daughter, Maya, and my younger brother Julian, who managed our family finances with a smile. Every Sunday evening I still set a third plate at the dinner table, and every morning at dawn, I stand by the lighthouse staring at the gray water. Before I reveal the evidence I found, I want to thank everyone for being here today. Please comment below with the city or state you are watching from. Your presence as witnesses truly matters to me. While inspired by real patterns of inheritance fraud, some elements of this Sterling family archive have been dramatized for privacy. Now, let's look at the first unsettling crack. I was clearing the cache on our shared office computer last Tuesday, October 12, 2021, when a deleted PDF caught my eye in the recycling bin. It was a scanned receipt from Vanderbilt Jewelers, a boutique on 4th Street where I had purchased Elena's engagement ring decades ago. The document was dated July 14, 2021, exactly 18 months after the coastal storm that supposedly took her life. The item listed was an emerald teardrop necklace with a custom S engraving. I told myself Julian was simply buying a tribute piece for a new girlfriend to honor Elena's memory. But my hands felt cold. Why would he use our private family account for a personal gift? 2 nights later, while looking for a spare tire iron in the trunk of Julian's black sedan, I found a small, crumpled blue silk ribbon snagged on the carpet. It was the exact shade of cerulean Elena used to wear every Sunday morning. I pressed the fabric to my face, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, the faint, unmistakable scent of Madagascar vanilla filled my lungs. This wasn't a tribute. It was a physical echo. My logical, engineering brain tried to calculate the odds of 2 identical ribbons and the same perfume appearing in my brother's car, but the math refused to settle. A dark, nameless suspicion began to take root in the very center of my chest. I began my investigation with the same cold, methodical precision I used to inspect the tension cables on the Cooper River Bridge. I didn't confront Julian. I became a ghost in my own house, watching his every move through the lens of my newfound clarity. On the evening of October 15th, I accessed our shared business server, looking for any trace of that emerald necklace purchase. Instead, I found a series of recurring wire transfers, each for exactly $4,900, sent to an entity called Lighthouse Holdings. These payments started 6 months after Elena's disappearance, and matched the exact dates Julian claimed he was working late to help me manage my estate. The deeper I dug into the digital wreckage, the more my hands began to shake with a violent, suppressed rage. I discovered a hidden subfolder in Julian's drive, encrypted with a password that was Elena's birthday, a detail that felt like a serrated blade across my throat. Inside was a high-resolution scan of a foreign passport application for a woman named Elena Varga, dated March 2021. The photo was unmistakable. It was my wife. Her hair dyed a deep chestnut brown, but her eyes held a chilling, calculating brightness I had never seen in our 20 years of marriage. My logical brain struggled to reconcile the angel I mourned with this phantom woman. I returned to the lighthouse at 4:15 a.m., the very spot where the Coast Guard told me the current would have swept her body out to sea. This time, I didn't look at the horizon. I looked at the ground, searching for the structural flaws in their story. Tucked between two jagged rocks near the service entrance, I found a discarded gold foil wrapper from the expensive European chocolates Elena used to crave during her midnight shifts at the gallery. There were fresh footprints in the salt-crusted sand, leading toward a secluded access road. These weren't the marks of a grieving brother. They were the tracks of a man meeting a very much alive conspirator. Realizing I was out of my depth, I contacted Marcus Vane, a man who understood the architecture of deception better than anyone I knew. Marcus was a private investigator and my oldest friend from our days in the Army Corps of Engineers, a specialist in tracking missing assets and broken men. We met at the Rusty Bolt, a dimly lit diner on the edge of the industrial district where no one would recognize a grieving widower. Marcus looked at the documents I had gathered, his scarred face hardening into a mask of professional concern. He didn't offer empty platitudes or hollow comfort. He simply opened his laptop and began to dismantle the lies. Within 90 minutes, Marcus uncovered the first major layer of the conspiracy, and the scale of it made my previous suspicions look like minor cracks. He tracked the Lighthouse Holdings account to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, but the physical address for the local representative was Julian's private office. More devastatingly, Marcus discovered that $50,000 had been moved from my daughter Maya's college fund directly into a vendor account for St. Jude's event planning. This wasn't just about Julian stealing my retirement. He was systematically draining the future of my only child to fund a celebration that felt like an intentional desecration of our family's history. The investigation took a darker turn when Marcus accessed the metadata from an anonymous email account Julian used on Tuesday nights. There were dozens of messages exchanged with a user identified only as ES, containing floor plans for a luxury villa in a neighboring county and flight itineraries to Zurich. One specific email, sent on September 30th, chilled my blood. It was a confirmation from a life insurance agent named Miller, acknowledging the final payout of $1 million. The conspiracy wasn't just a two-person job. Julian had bribed the official who handled Elena's missing person case to ensure the death certificate was processed without a body ever being recovered. My heart hammered against my ribs as the third and most personal revelation came to light through a forged signature on the insurance claim forms. Julian hadn't just stolen the money. He had used my own engineering stamp and a forged version of my handwriting to authorize the transfers. If I went to the police now, the paper trail would point directly to me as a co-conspirator who profited from his wife's fake death. They had built a cage made of my own professional reputation, ensuring that if I dared to speak the truth, I would be the one facing federal charges for insurance fraud. The trap was meticulously designed to keep me silent. Marcus used a satellite ping to track a burner phone Julian had contacted 17 times in the last 48 hours. The signal led us to a gated community in Ravenel, only 40 miles from my front door, where a high-end rental property was registered to an alias. We sat in Marcus's darkened truck, using long-range thermal optics to watch the silhouette in the second-story window. For a split second, the woman stepped out onto the balcony to catch the evening breeze, and my breath hitched in my chest. She was wearing the cerulean blue ribbon, looking at the stars with a serenity that belonged to someone who had already forgotten I existed. As I watched my deceased wife enjoy the luxury my life's work had paid for, Marcus revealed the final, urgent piece of the puzzle. Julian and Elena weren't just getting married. They were scheduled to board a private charter at 10 p.m. on the night of the wedding, vanishing forever with the remainder of my liquid assets. I had less than 72 hours to dismantle their construction before the foundation of my life was permanently erased. This leads me to a crucial question for all of you watching this evidence unfold right now. Do you believe my daughter Maya is truly my ally in this, or is she a part of the trap? Type ally or trap below. Marcus handed me a leather-bound ledger he'd recovered from Julian's secondary safe at the marina. It wasn't just a list of stolen funds. It was a map of a parasitic network. I saw names of local city clerks, bank managers from First Coastal, and even a notary I had trusted for 20 years. They weren't just helping Julian move money. They were actively shielding Lighthouse Holdings from any internal audits. Each entry was a calculated blow to my sanity, totaling over $600,000 in consultation fees. My brother hadn't just robbed me. He had built a professional infrastructure designed to ensure that my financial ruin was legally bulletproof. As an engineer, I knew the structural limits of the Elena Rose, our family's 24-foot coastal cruiser. The official report from January 14, 2020, claimed a rogue wave snapped the hull, but Marcus found a series of high-speed photos taken by a harbor drone that morning. The hull was intact 3 miles past the alleged wreck site. My brother had hired a salvage diver named Silas Thorne to scuttle a decoy vessel while Elena slipped away on a private skiff. The precision of the timing, down to the 4:12 a.m. tide shift, proved this wasn't a desperate escape. It was a military-grade extraction. I had mourned a sinking that never actually happened. The deeper I looked, the more the conspiracy expanded into the very institutions that were supposed to protect us. Marcus uncovered an encrypted recording between Julian and Dr. Eris Thorne, the medical examiner who signed off on the presumed dead status. In the audio, Julian's voice was cold, devoid of the grief he'd performed for me at the memorial. He promised Thorne a 10% cut of the life insurance payout if the certificate was expedited by March 15th. Hearing my brother barter over the price of my wife's fake death felt like a structural failure of the soul. I was standing in the middle of a collapse I couldn't stop. On Thursday evening, I noticed a silver SUV parked 3 houses down from my driveway on Oak Street. It had been there for 6 hours, the engine idling intermittently in the cooling autumn air. When I stepped onto my porch at 9 p.m., the headlights flickered once, a silent warning that I was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. I checked my home office and found a microscopic listening device planted inside the base of my vintage desk lamp. They weren't just waiting for me to find out. They were monitoring my heartbeat, waiting for the exact moment my reaction would justify them taking the next, more permanent step. The most devastating discovery came from a draft folder in Julian's legal cloud account. He had prepared a petition to have me declared mentally incompetent, citing prolonged grief-induced psychosis and unstable financial decisions. He used the fact that I still set a dinner plate for Elena as evidence of my cognitive decline. If I tried to expose them now, Julian would trigger the filing, using his hand-picked doctors to have me committed to a private facility. He would then become my legal guardian, gaining absolute control over the few remaining assets he hadn't already drained. The cage was closing, and the bars were made of my own shattered heart. I spent the early hours of Friday morning reviewing my Social Security statements and discovered that my identity was being systematically dismantled. Julian had opened 3 offshore lines of credit using my engineering license as collateral, racking up debts totaling nearly $400,000 in the Cayman Islands. If the Lighthouse Holdings scheme failed, the creditors would come for me, not him. He had effectively swapped our lives. I was becoming a ghost of debt while he was preparing to step into the sunlight as a wealthy, unburdened man. Every bridge I'd ever built felt like it was crumbling into the dark water of his bottomless, narcissistic greed. I found a hidden compartment in Maya's laptop bag while she was at her internship, and for a moment, I feared my daughter was the final architect of my ruin. Inside was a thick file of surveillance photos showing Julian and Elena together in a villa in Ravenel, dated over 6 months ago. Maya hadn't been hiding the truth to protect the traitors. She had been acting as a silent documentarian because she knew I wasn't strong enough to see it yet. Her notes were clinical and heartbreaking, detailing every time Julian consoled me while secretly meeting the woman I was crying over. My daughter was the only foundation left in a world of sand. The final piece of the escalation was a set of 3 one-way first-class tickets to Zurich, scheduled for 11:30 p.m. on the night of the wedding. Julian hadn't just planned a ceremony, he had planned a vanishing act that would leave me holding $1 million debt and a fraudulent death certificate. The flight manifest included a woman named Elena Varga, my wife's new alias, and Julian, traveling under a stolen corporate identity. They were going to leave me in the rubble of the life we built, laughing all the way to a Swiss vault. I had exactly 48 hours before the people I loved most turned into smoke and disappeared forever. I am sitting in my darkened kitchen, staring at the emerald necklace receipt, knowing my next step will either save my life or lead to a prison cell. The scale of this betrayal is beyond anything I imagined, and the evidence I am about to reveal is truly disturbing. If you have a sensitive heart, you may want to stop watching now, as the footage from the church foyer is something you can never unsee. For those who stay, prepare yourselves for the moment the veil finally rips and the monster is unmasked. Before we continue, I must ask, do you think I should call the authorities now, or finish this confrontation on my own? I stood frozen in the vestibule of St. Jude's, the heavy scent of incense clashing with the sterile metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. The priest's voice crackled through the speakers, thanking a secret benefactor for the lavish display of lilies and gold-leafed programs. My eyes locked onto the bride's neck as she tilted her head to whisper to Julian, and the afternoon sun caught the specific internal flaw of the emerald teardrop I had handpicked 2 decades ago. It wasn't a replica or a tribute. The light refracted through that familiar occlusion, proving the physical reality of a ghost. I felt the structural integrity of my logic beginning to snap, refusing to process the impossible image. Then she turned, and the world dissolved into a sickening, rhythmic pulse behind my eyes. The woman I had wept for during 700 sleepless nights didn't look like a victim of the sea. She looked like a masterpiece of deception. My lungs seized, a cold weight expanding in my diaphragm that made every breath feel like swallowing shards of glass. My hands began to shake with a violent, involuntary tremor, my fingers clenching into white-knuckled fists until my nails drew blood from my palms. The nausea was an acidic tide rising in my throat as I realized the miracle of her survival was actually the calculated architecture of my utter ruin. In that searing moment, 2 memories I had buried in the name of love clawed their way to the surface. I remembered Elena's supposed terror of the ocean, a detail I used to justify her disappearance when the boat was found empty. But now I saw it as the perfect excuse to ensure I never looked for her on the shore. I thought of the scribbled note she left on the night of the storm, which I cherished as a final goodbye, realizing it was a coded inventory for the life she was building with my brother. The love I felt for her silhouette collided with a newfound hatred, creating a friction that threatened to burn my soul. The red fog descended, turning my cold shock into the predatory clarity of a man who has nothing left to lose but his silence. I reached for the heavy oak handles of the sanctuary doors, the wood feeling rough and honest against my skin, unlike the people standing beyond them. My life as I knew it had already collapsed, leaving only the wreckage of a 20-year lie that I was finally ready to dismantle in front of God and the law. Before I take this final, irreversible step into the light of their betrayal, I need to know you are still with me. Are you here to witness this reckoning? Type, "still here," in the comments right now. The heavy oak doors didn't just open. They groaned under the weight of 20 years of misplaced trust finally shattering. I walked down the center aisle of St. Jude's, my work boots striking the polished marble with a rhythmic mechanical thud that drowned out the panicked stutter of the pipe organ. Julian's face drained of color, turning the sickly shade of spoiled milk as he clutched Elena's hand, the hand I had kissed every morning for 2 decades. The guests gasped, a collective intake of breath that felt like a vacuum in the holy space. I didn't scream. I simply held up my engineering tablet, the high-resolution images of their Ravenel hideout glowing like a digital indictment in the dim light. "Stop the ceremony, Father," I said, my voice resonating with a cold, structural authority that silenced the murmuring pews. I looked directly at the priest, whose confusion was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "The woman standing before you isn't a miracle. She's a federal fugitive who faked her drowning to trigger $1 million insurance payout." I reached out and gripped the emerald teardrop necklace, the metal cold against my calloused palm, and ripped it from her neck with a single sharp jerk. "This was bought with my daughter's college fund, Julian. You didn't just steal my retirement. You looted the very future of our family to pay for this desecration of a wedding." Julian stepped forward, his eyes darting toward the side exits as he tried to wrap his arm around Elena in a protective gesture that felt like a physical insult. "Arthur, you're sick. The grief has finally broken your mind, just like the doctors warned me," he shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate, manipulative edge. He turned to the wedding guests, pleading for them to witness my psychosis, his hands trembling as he tried to maintain the facade of the supportive, grieving brother. Elena stayed silent, her eyes flickering with a predatory intelligence, looking for the structural flaw in my resolve. They truly believed that if they shouted loud enough, the truth would simply disappear. But the pressure was too high, and every structure has its breaking point. When I tossed the forged death certificate onto the altar, Julian finally snapped, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unbridled resentment that had been festering for 48 years. "You always had the perfect life, the perfect career, the perfect respect," he screamed, the spittle flying from his lips as he abandoned the lie. "You didn't deserve her, Arthur. You were too boring, too focused on your blueprints to see that she wanted a life that actually felt alive. I didn't steal your money. I liberated it from a man who was already dead inside. We earned every cent of that insurance payout." The heavy thud of the side doors echoed through the chapel as Detective Sarah Miller entered, followed by 4 uniformed officers whose boots sounded like a final heartbeat against the stone. She didn't hesitate, walking straight past the sobbing bridesmaids to place the cold steel of handcuffs around Julian's wrists. "Julian Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft," she stated, her voice a flat, professional drone that signaled the end of their luxury. They forced Elena onto her knees, her white designer veil fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. The realization that there was no escape finally hit her, her tanned face turning a ghostly, terrified gray. The legal collapse was as total as the structural failure of a bridge with no supports. By the time the sun set, Julian was facing a recommended sentence of 15 years in federal prison, with every cent of his personal assets frozen to pay back the $450,000 he drained. Elena's new identity was formally revoked, her resurrection documented as a felony that would keep her behind bars for a minimum of a decade. I watched from the church steps as they were loaded into separate black cruisers, the flashing blue lights reflecting off the empty lighthouse in the distance. The foundation of my life was gone, but the rot had finally been cleared away for good. 1 year has passed since the heavy doors of St. Jude's closed on the ghosts of my past. Today, the morning sun hits the steel cables of the new Cooper River extension, a foundation I personally inspected for structural integrity. My house on Oak Street no longer smells of vanilla or blue silk ribbons. It smells of fresh pine and the coffee Maya brews every Sunday morning before our hike. We don't set a third plate anymore. Instead, we share photos of her first published investigative report. The $450,000 was partially recovered, but the true wealth is the silence of a home no longer built on a sinkhole of lies. I'm talking to you now because every structure has a breaking point, and yours might be closer than you think. Blood is a sacred bond, but as I learned, even the thickest blood can be sold for a designer veil and a Cayman account. My father always said that divine justice is a slow-moving train, but it never misses its station. I allowed my protective loyalty to turn into a blindfold while the vultures circled my legacy. Don't let that happen to you. If this journey through the Sterling Archive helped you see your own walls, please comment, share, and subscribe to our community. While inspired by true inheritance fraud, some elements were dramatized for privacy.